Hello, welcome to our workshop today on millennials and Gen Z and finding out all about that elusive animal that we all want in our churches and want to know about. I'm Jenny Whitford, and with us today we have Taylor Barner from OSU UKirk Partnership with our Presbyterian. Claudia Charlie is here actually from Pittsburgh, but she grew up in the Columbus area. And online, we have Connie from Grove City, and she's going to join us also. So she is a teacher in the Grove City schools and also has some other insights that she's going to share. And so I think let's start with prayer. Seems like it's a good place to start. Loving and holy God, thank you for this day. Thank you for this beautiful sunshine streaming through. Thank you for the people who are here learning and want to know and grow your kingdom. Help us to listen to what you have to say through our discussion here, not only with our three adults, but with each other. We pray all these things in the name of Jesus. Amen. Amen. So Connie is actually going to start us out online, and she is going to give us kind of an overview of millennial and Gen Zs. And I also have a handout, and Connie, just tell me when you are ready for that.
Yeah, so I actually I'm going to share my screen, and I do appreciate everybody being very flexible with me this morning. Just a little heads up about why I'm online. I am 15 weeks pregnant, and I found out Thursday that I have COVID. So I did not want to come in person and spread that lovely COVID germ with all of you. But we have this wonderful technology, which is great because we're talking about millennials and Gen Zs, and technology is a huge part of that. So this is kind of like fed right into the discussion. So I'm going to actually share my screen. And I have a handout, well, not a handout, but it's more of a infographic about what are these Gen Z, millennials, Gen Y, Gen X, what are these things? So this handout I found very helpful. Kind of breaks down every generation here.
Hey,
Yeah.
Connie, can you, something's up with your screen. We're seeing like kind of multiple screens. Maybe you can make it. Oh, sorry. Okay, it's Brian.
Are you guys able to see that? Okay, cool. So, I'm not going to talk about the ones that are on the far left. I'm mainly going to talk about the last three on the far right. Starting with the Gen Y here in the purple. Gen Y is also known as millennials. And the age group of this is people who were born between 1980 to 1994. I am classified as a young millennial because I was born in 92. But these millennials lived through and remember the impact of 9/11. They also remember landline telephones, and they remember Walkmans, and they remember CD players, VHS players, but they also know how to use technology. So iPods, iPads, DVD players, those kinds of things. But the really interesting part is this stuff down here at the bottom is how they are leaders, what they like in a learning style, how they market themselves, and then who they find influence from. So for millennials, they are guiding in their leadership styles. They like supportive leaders. They do learning styles by being interactive. And they find their most influence from peers, so people in their same age group. And then their marketing, they like to do online, but it's more in a linked kind of way instead of a complete online digital marketing. So that's kind of our millennials. Going over to our Gen Z. So these are those who are born between 1995 to 2009. So the big thing that they lived through was the great financial crisis of 2008. And then they were some of the ones who had or remembered the first Tesla model, Tesla Model S. And Spotify is how they got their music. So more of that digital age, um, coming to terms with the digital world. So, because that's all they've ever known. So, leadership style, they do an empowering leadership style. So, they want to be empowered, but they also want to empower others. They are collaborators for people that they work well with as leaders. So, they want to be more collaborative. They have multimodal learning styles, which means multiple different ways of learning, not just one single way, just multiple different ways all at the same time. They find their best advice from forums. So random people on the internet, they ask a question and they get a bunch of advice. That's how they like to get their advice. And then they market using total social media, so a digital platform, 100%. So we're going to touch briefly on Gen Alpha because I feel like they are still important to this conversation because without them, we won't have a church in 15 years. So we want to make sure that they are included. Gen Alpha is those who were born in 2010 to 2024. And the big thing they lived through is COVID. And one of the big things that they remember or that they are dealing with cars is autonomous cars, so self-driving vehicles. Music technology is usually done through smart speakers, either in the home or outside of the home, Siri, um, Alexa, those kinds of things. They are inspiring leaders, so they really try to inspire those that they work with. And they want to be co-creators. So they want to work with others to share that leadership instead of doing it all themselves. Their learning style is virtual. So I see that a lot. I am a school teacher, and so we see this virtual learning where they are learning on a computer or through a screen 99% of the time. They get their advice through chatbots, which to me is very weird. But they get their advice through chatbots. So they might ask ChatGPT, hey, why is this happening? And then the chatbot will tell them. And then what I found interesting for their marketing is they want marketing in real time. So they want it immediately, right away, right now. So these are kind of the three big age groups that we're going to talk about today in our panel discussion.
Okay, thank you very much. That was very helpful. So I have some questions for the panel, and they will each take some time with each of the questions. So it doesn't matter who answers first. What were each of you looking for when you're looking for a church? What are you looking for when you're looking? I know Claudia, I think has landed and found a church. So.
Can you guys hear me okay? Great. Yeah, my name is Claudia, and thank you for having me here today. I do live in Pittsburgh, which is about 3.5 hours away from here. But I most regularly actually attend Granville Presbyterian, which is in Ohio. So not a super close commute for me. I have spent quite a bit of time looking for different churches in my area and haven't quite landed on the right fit for me. I think I'm looking for an inclusive church with lots of diversity. I'm looking for varying age groups. I have a 2-year-old daughter that you might have seen around here. Her name is Sylvia, and I'm looking for a community that wants her to be part of the congregation and wants to bring her into the congregation too. So those are some of the things I'm looking for.
I'm Taylor Barner. As Jenny introduced me, I work over at The Ohio State University with a group called Jacob's Porch, which is our registered UKirk at OSU. I've been there for the last 1.5 years, and prior to that, though, I was serving in a church in North Carolina as an associate pastor for youth and family ministry. And one of the things that I experienced within my first couple years at FPC Burlington was burnout in ministry. Ministry became work, and it wasn't a place of spirituality as much for me. And thankfully, I had some wonderful spiritual advisors and mentors to kind of coax me out of that period of my life and to reconnect spiritually with the work that I was doing. But when we moved up here, my wife and I were looking around a couple different places for churches, and we ended up at Worthington Presbyterian Church, mainly because my wife got a job there. But what we were both kind of looking for was a place where we could reconnect spiritually and maintain that. Because for years, I had gotten up on Sunday mornings to work, and it was nice to finally sit in the pew with my wife for the first time, and to not feel like there was a responsibility that was going to be thrust upon me when I stepped through the doors of the church. Now, obviously, we have services on Sunday nights, so I still do work on Sundays. But the joy that we found in most of the churches that we went to was people were just happy to see us. And I think that that's a critical piece of it, is this idea that we move beyond our pews that we sit in each week to connect. And that was critical for us at Worthington. It was critical at the other churches that we visited briefly before my wife started working there. So my situation is a little bit more unique, I think. You don't oftentimes see young clergy who have that flexibility, and my position is a little bit more unique in that sense.
So I'm Connie Moneypenny. I attend church at Grove City Presbyterian. I'm a little bit different than the other people on the panel. So I have been at the same church my entire life. I have not really had that experience of looking for a church. Um, I will say that I have always been very involved in the church that I have been in, and I think that's why that I have stayed there. Um, so I am involved in the technology team, running PowerPoints, Sunday morning services. Um, I work with some of our other young adults to host baby showers for young people in our church when they have a child. Um, just different activities to help foster our young adults in the church. And being involved in choir and music as well, it's just really solidified like this is my church home. This is a place where I feel connected to other people. Like Taylor said, when I come in the morning, it's hi, Connie, how are you? How's it going? What's new? What's going on? So just really feeling that connection. And I feel like we are a little bit more on the traditional side. And that's something that I really enjoy as well, is those traditions and ministry, and having those and knowing that I can always come back to those traditions is something that I think has just kept me around. I did leave for college. I went down to Marietta College, which is about an hour and a half, 2-hour drive. And so even through that experience, I went to several churches. None of them felt like home. And when I left college, coming back, the first place I went back to was my home church. And I even lived in DC for a while. I did 6 months in DC, did the same thing. So I went to a couple of Presbyterian churches in the DC metro area, and none of them really felt like home. And when I got back, I went to my home church, and I felt like I was where I belonged.
I think a hard transition for me in the past couple years has been leaving the church I grew up in. So I went from kindergarten through college, high school, at Worthington Presbyterian, and then completely transplanted to a different city. So no one knew that I was sleeping in the pews or playing the handbells there. And so I didn't have that church community that I grew up with. So figuring out how to form a community as an adult was a big challenge for me. And I think feeling welcome is so important, and not recreating that situation, but developing that as an adult is an important aspect of being a millennial in a new church or in a church that you've been at your whole life.
Thank you. So next question is, could you share some experiences that you've had in the church as a young adult?
Again, I feel like I come at this from a somewhat unique perspective, being clergy. But starting off right after seminary, my track through education was undergrad, right into seminary, right into my first call into ministry in 2017. And I was grateful when I joined the church down in North Carolina that there was another associate pastor. We had a staff of 3 pastors. The other associate pastor was only 2 years older than I was, and kind of looked out for me in terms of helping me to build some relationships in the church at that early stage. And that pastor herself was the pastor for young adults and pastoral care. So her work primarily focused on keeping our young adult group at the church together, which spanned a lot of different age groups. It was honestly one of the first examples that I had of seeing post-college students and young adults families operating in the same group. But you could see in our church throughout certain periods there would be chunks of kind of Sunday school classes that would stick together, and it was always kind of hard to see, well, when did they decide to cut it off? When did it stop being the John Knox class, and when did it start being the Silver Singles class or whatever? After about a year or so, that associate pastor left for another call, and in reshuffling the responsibilities around, it ended up that young adults got passed to me as the youth person, because naturally the young adult should be the person coordinating the young adults. And what I actually found was that it was hard actually to keep those groups connected because they had already changed. Already the young adults with families who had in part had built a relationship with that pastor who had moved on, they started to transition into their own group, and so they stuck together. And I started to have some of my students who were graduating college then come to young adulthood, and they're like, I don't really connect with this generation of young adults. And so we had to kind of straddle the fence, so to speak, in terms of building a new network for this age group that was fresh out of college, or those who were young adults without kids, particularly, and yet still keep them connected to this generation of older young adults who still were classified in the same age group that we define. Because the age group 22 to 35, I think, is typically what we talk about when we talk about young adults. But that's not even a hard line in the sand. Sometimes you have young adult groups that have people that are in their 40s who just may not feel an attachment to another group in the church. And so my experience was more so trying to figure out who exactly I was. Am I the pastor that's just getting you together, or am I actually part of this group too? And it was difficult to connect those two groups, because here, this group that's coming out of college, I had built relationships with in youth group and while they were in college, and so my relationship with them was categorically different than it was with the young adults who were actually my age. And so it was hard to generate any kind of personal friendships with that older group, because they saw me as the pastor. They didn't see me as a peer. And so that's been my experience in the church, has been trying to break in is hard. And a lot of times, if you don't have a network of young adults already established, it's not impossible to establish one. But a lot of times, as humans, we love our groups the way that they are, and we don't want to see them change. And we got to be open to that. So, sorry, I've talked too much.
Connie, do you want to chime in?
Yeah. So my experience with young adults has kind of been a little bit all over the place. Um, like I said, I did end up leaving for college for about a year. And when I had come back, all of the kids that I was in Sunday school with were all gone. So I had a large Sunday school class, probably 10 to 15, that I was in Sunday school with that just no longer existed. And so, kind of like Taylor said, I was like, where do I fit in here? Because I don't feel comfortable in the adult Sunday school group. I don't feel comfortable in the women's Sunday school group. Where do I fit in? Where do I go? Who are my people? Um, and so with that, I struggled for a couple of years, and then I got asked to be on session at my church, which for me was kind of a big deal, because I was a young person, and being asked to be in that leadership role for the church was huge. And so in that experience, it was a great experience, love it. I actually served 2 terms on worship committee at my church. However, sometimes during meetings, I would get, well, Connie's the young person. Let's ask her what she thinks as the token young person in the room. And sometimes that was okay. Other times it was like, great, thanks. Thanks for calling me out there. Um, but I really kind of took that role and kind of ran with it to empower other young people in the church to get into leadership roles. I think at this point, I've had 4 other young adults in the church, who I have kind of talked to about session and what their role is and got them involved at that leadership level, along with some of our deacons as well. And so just really empowering some of our other young adults to get into those leadership roles, I think has been really great for our church. I also have worked with technology. Again, I'm the young person in the room, helping run technology, especially during COVID, just that troubleshoot kind of young person, and really get people to understand technology is the future of church, whether we like it or not. And we're going to have to adapt whatever that may mean. And so after kind of feeling like I was hitting my head on a brick wall for several years, it finally clicked and we kind of got through that barrier. But sometimes that's what it feels like for young adults is they feel like they're hitting their head against a brick wall. Um, Sometimes they break through and sometimes they don't. I've started, I think, 2 or 3 different Bible studies, different classes with young adults at the church. They have failed every single time. I can't tell you why, but they have. But that's okay. We tried. We tried and we learned. Um, and at this point now, me and a group of a couple other ladies, like I said, we host baby showers for those in our church who are young adults who are having families to make sure they feel that connectedness, they feel that welcomeness, and they feel like they do have a place in the church. And so just kind of all of those experiences kind of wrapped into one, it's really just making people feel seen, making sure that they feel that love and make sure that they feel like they do have a place, whatever that place in your church may look like, that they do have a place there.
Thank you. The question was, what have been your experiences in a church as a young adult?
Thank you. So over the last maybe year and a half, I've really begun to go to different churches. I've put like a 10 to 15 mile radius from my house, and I've just been pinpointing on Google Maps all the Presbyterian churches, and trying them out in the areas on Sundays. I really like to look at the websites ahead of time to make sure that they would fit my values and that I know an idea of what they're going to be talking about there. And so I would really urge churches to keep those websites updated with what you believe, what you're going to be talking about, what your goals are for your community, so that young adults who primarily use the internet as a form of deciding whether they might do something are able to check that out before they decide to come, or check it out and say, maybe this isn't a good fit for me. When I go to church, I like to take my 2-year-old because it's a family event. Sometimes there are really great experiences and people don't mind her wandering around, and those are great. There are playgrounds, there are books, there is a little bit of talking, and all of that is great. Excuse me. Sometimes the experience isn't as great. I get a lot of side eyes, or she's talking, or crinkling snack containers, and that can be a really discouraging experience for a millennial to come and say, oh, this isn't a family event. And it just makes me not want to continue to attend a church, even though it might be a good fit on paper. It might be a welcoming community. If you can't welcome my whole family, it might not be a good fit for me. So I would just encourage making spaces that everyone can attend, making spaces that is comfortable for a 2-year-old, or making a space, if you have portions of a service that you wouldn't want a 2-year-old to attend, making a space that a 2-year-old could be in, a nursery, a play area, just so that an entire family could be part of a church family. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question. So how can the church better address your needs and your concerns? And I know we've talked about that a little bit too. And also, I guess, since I have the microphone, I'm kind of also curious, because each of you do have these different experiences, and maybe Taylor, you'll talk about this, but what are you seeing from other people? Like Connie, I don't know how many other young adults are in your church, and like at Worthington, what do you guys do? And so I'm kind of curious about that. So what are some experiences you guys have had? And I'm sorry, we just did that one, but how could the church better address your needs?
Yeah, I'll go first. So one of the great things was having an established young adult ministry at Worthington, and that's kind of hard. That's a hard starting point, because how do you have a young adult ministry if you don't have young adults, kind of a thing. But it's proof that once you can get the ball rolling, it rolls itself. That the outreach that we do matters. I think there's a fine line between intentionality and being overbearing. I think one of the things that we tend to do with any new person that attends a church is we want to get them on a committee as soon as possible so that they stay there. If you're on a committee, you're contractually bound to do this work. And I saw that, honestly. I saw it a lot of times when we would get new students in the youth group. The church was always looking for a way to get them to be involved, which is great, but it was only ever through work. It wasn't through seeing them in worship. It wasn't through seeing them be a liturgist on Sunday morning or being part of the choir. It wasn't through engaging them outside of the church space. I can't tell you how many times I had folks come up to me and say, oh, I saw another young person in here. What's their name? I'm like, I didn't even know they were here myself. So how am I supposed to tell you about who they are? And the same thing went with young people. For our current Gen Zs, since we're talking about Gen Z as well, I had members of my own church come up and be like, it was so great to see those kids in worship. Do you know them? Have they been coming to youth group? I'm like, they were confirmed here. They've been here for 7 years. So I think the idea of intentionality is part of it. Without coming across like we have to keep you in here. We got to escape this survivalist mindset and just appreciate people for who they are and reach out to them after they're there. I think one of the things that kind of in that line, one of the things that we experienced at most of the churches that we attended up here was we got a call from the pastor afterwards, which is great, saying, hey, saw that you had filled out our visitor cards, which I'm not sure if people still do that. Me being part of the clergy and having to put those out and collect them at the end of the service, I'm always like, yeah, fill out those cards. Like, they're really actually crucial. Young adults are not always going to be the ones to put themselves out there. So taking the initiative to take the step to further encourage a relationship to grow, those are the little things that we can be doing on a day-to-day basis. Now, as we've already heard up here, every young adult is different. Some of us enjoy the flexibility of worshiping online and not getting up on a Sunday morning, not even. Others, like myself, for the first time, I was so excited to get up on a Sunday morning and go to church, and to have that community in person. But my experience is not going to be the same for everybody else. And so being flexible and understanding how we need to adapt our strategies on an individual level for connecting as a community is part of it. I think we oftentimes want to have this blanket approach to what fellowship looks like or what community looks like. But across all of it, intentionality is what matters. So if we take the time to invest, however minute of a detail it may be, whether it's paying attention to how often somebody's been in worship, and then reaching out, grabbing coffee, visiting a youth sporting event, which is where you're going to find most of your young adults on Sundays. That's where you're going to start to build those connections and deepen a sense of relationship beyond the walls of the church.
I would suggest, okay, let me step back. So as a young parent, it's easy for me to get overwhelmed. I have nap times and bedtimes and playtime, and a lot revolves around my child. And going to church and joining 3 committees and staying for the care event afterwards and going to coffee hour feels overwhelming. To sign myself up for all of those activities and attending a Wednesday event and then putting my child in an evening event, it's a lot. So I would urge you to do small, impactful things with this group specifically, millennials, to help them feel involved. Maybe could you deliver the flowers on the chancel to an older adult? That's a 1-hour commitment, not a every week for the next 5 years for 3 hours a day commitment. Would you mind dropping off this food to a family who could use a little extra food? That's a 30-minute commitment. Making smaller but very impactful things can really help connect people to your church without putting such a prescriptive amount of time, amount of effort to force them, to involve them without feeling forced, if that makes sense.
Connie, did you want to share about some about Grove City? Because I just find it fascinating, the growth that you guys have had there too.
Yeah. So one of the big things that I would say is really important is giving grace. Giving grace to young adults is huge. I mean, I'm at this point, I'm 33, well, almost 33. So I'm technically one of those older young adults, but I still need grace. Um, if something happens, obviously today, I could not be there in person. I needed some grace to be able to join you online. Um, if young adults can't be there every Sunday, give them grace. Like, it's okay. They're overwhelmed. They have everything going on in their life, especially um if they have kids, obviously. We just heard about that, so give them grace. One of the other big things is basically that falls in with everything that everybody had already said. Just give them compassion, give them grace. They are not going to be able to be there all the time. They're not going to be able to make huge commitments. So just lead with grace with them. The other thing I did want to piggyback kind of off of what Taylor had said is make them feel seen. Whether that is during church, if that's after church, if that's in the grocery store, make them feel seen. The only thing I caution on that is don't let them know that they were not seen. That will hurt them more than anything else. Be like, well, you haven't been at church for the last couple of weeks. What's going on? You will immediately push them into a corner and you may not ever see them again. So that's the one thing. I know the intention is there to be genuine and to be nice, but really when that happens, you are pushing them away. So yeah, make them feel seen, make them feel involved. in whatever that capacity may look like for them. It can't be off the church's schedule. It has to be off the young adult schedule. Jobs are no longer 9 to 5. A lot of young adults no longer have 9 to 5 jobs. So being flexible if they do join a committee, change the committee time so that they can be there. Make it so that it's not every Sunday at 2 o'clock, make it every other, once a month, something that you want them there, you want them on that committee, you want them in that space, make them feel that. So yeah.
Thank you. So just a couple other observations, and then we'll open the floor for some questions, is I read a recent statistic that said the average attendance for most families is 1 Sunday every 5. So you won't see people every Sunday like the olden days, for sure. And what Connie said, people work different shifts and different jobs as well. My husband worked in the prison system and worked second shift and worked weekends for a long time. So understanding grace and understanding that there are so many different things pulling our families, that it is important to understand that. And also, I beg you not to think that that people that worship online are not actually worshiping and that they're not included in your church family. That's a big deal, and it's really important we have that resource for people, and they truly are a part of your church family, even worshiping online. Oh, Connie, you want to say something? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Something just popped into my head when you were talking, and I wanted to talk to it for a second. I know we've talked a lot about families, but do not discredit those who are single, who are young adults as well. It takes a lot of courage to go to church as a single person. I did it for a very long time, even though it was my home church. Sometimes it was hard. It was hard to go to Easter by myself. It was hard to come to Christmas Eve by myself. So just kind of remember that too with our young adults, if they're not married, or even if they are and their partner doesn't come to church with them, just kind of be cognizant of that and just know that, maybe they could use some extra love on those special Sundays or those special event services, because, they probably don't want to be alone and they're choosing to come to church to have that community. So just kind of keep that in mind as well.
Thank you. That's very important. So yeah, we want to spend the next 10 minutes or so with some questions from you guys, some things that you've been thinking about. Pass the microphone. Don't be shy. Okay.
Sorry, Connie. When I was growing up, my activities centered around the church. And so if I did other activities like mission or service projects or volunteerism, it was all through the church. And so can you speak to me about how you weigh there's so much available to volunteer, so much available to do. How do you weigh how you choose your time? I don't know if I'm saying it very well, but it's different for you than it is for me with the options of working with other people.
Great question. I think this is honestly part of the root of the issue for us, is seeing in the ways in which the world has changed. Church is still a place for all of those things. Yes, we know that is true. The problem is we can get it elsewhere now. And we can get it much more readily available online, in different communities and forums online as well. There are many nonprofits that are not associated with the church that we get involved with. I've seen this mainly in my college students, particularly. They love everything that the church does, but it's a commodity to them. That they can come and take from this time the spiritual rejuvenation that it provides, but then they can go pour themselves out into other things. I've also seen the ways in which time itself is different in our society. I work 9 to 4 typically, Monday through Thursday, and then on Sunday nights, right currently. And when I come home, I've got 5 hours to myself pretty much before my wife goes to bed, which means I usually go to bed too. Not always. She yells at me sometimes for that. Don't tell her I said that. I'm just kidding. Trying to bring some levity here. But the idea that the time that we have, young adults do prioritize their alone time, that as a precious commodity, that they get to decide how they choose to spend it. And I see this because growing up in the church, we were constantly at church. We were there for making meals for those who were in need. The kids would go hang out. We hung out while our parents cooked and did all that stuff. We would go there for Sunday school. We would be there for youth group in the evenings. But then we'd also be there for a 5K race that happened every year. We'd be there for book studies. We'd be there for stuff that was connected to our schools, because schools were more involved with church as part of the community. Our society doesn't function that way anymore. And I'm not saying that it should necessarily. I think it's great that we have these other opportunities to get involved in these kinds of things elsewhere. But also it is important that we as the church continue to say to young people that they can find what they're looking for here. That we can change our programming to be more in tune with what they're passionate about. And I'm not just talking about like outreach work. I'm talking about like a board game club or a poetry slam club or something like that. Something, whatever it is that seems to motivate your specific young adults is something that you can start and be invested and involved in. And that's going to change every single time you add a new person into that group. And so, yeah, I love that the church was that, because that's what made me love church, was the fact that I could come to church and I could be a part of this community that was so involved in all these different aspects of my life. But we have to recognize that it's not that. It can be. I think it should be, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be for everybody. And certainly young adults who are constantly on the go, who have very limited time to commit to that kind of stuff on a regular basis, they're not going to be able to see it as such. So
I think it's important to think about the gifts that young adults have. That might be different than the gifts that older adults have. So if you offer an online presence for your church service, are there young adults that could help to build that process up, to make it more accessible, make it more interesting? Those gifts might lie in an older or in a younger adult, and they would be more connected to your community by helping, even if it's not packing lunches or leaving their home, but still providing that help to the community as a whole in their special way. So I think kind of thinking outside the box to make sure that we're using the gifts that everyone have to make our church community better, not only using the traditional gifts that we've used in the past.
Yeah, just to add to that, so I actually teach at a Catholic high school here in Columbus, Bishop Hartley, and there is a 25-hour service requirement for each year they're in school. So a lot of the times, our students don't do those in churches. They go out for 1 hour at a time and they'll do an event, or they'll do an event for 3 hours one time. And they know they have that blocked into their schedule. This is my 3-hour mission window, and this is what I'm going to do for this mission. And that's it. Other times, I actually run a knitting club at the school where our students can knit items, they get donated, and then they get service hours for those knitted items. That is another mission, but they do it when they can and when they want to. So they kind of do that on their time at home when they have that availability. And I think keeping both of those things in mind is critical as well. giving not only these missions that they can do at home, that they can do on their own time, but then have like a one-time mission day for a couple of hours where they can make that commitment and they know ahead of time and they can block out some time in their schedule. I think both of those are kind of key items to get that mission back into young people in the church.
Other questions? Do you have the microphone?
Hello, I'm Lainey, a fellow young person. So, hi, I know you all. So this question is coming from me and my experience as a millennial and my experience from my friends as well. And I'm going to see what you all think about it too. So I know Claudia talked about needing to see the values that churches have on their website and making sure that your values align with that before you go. So how important do you think it is to young people that the church that they're trying out or going to, that what they're doing in the community, what they're speaking in the pulpit, and what they're teaching in classes aligns with the values that they say they have? So that's part of it. And how important is it that they are having hard conversations well? So part of that, I'm thinking, is like, I think in the past there's been this idea that we don't bring our politics and hard discussions into the church, and I think that might be different for young people. So I wanted to see what y'all thought.
Yes, please.
I would be inclined to agree with Lainey that it is really important to see across the board that happening. So not only is it on their website, but we're hearing it from the pulpit. We're having discussions in a Bible study. We're using that language in our congregation. We're seeing that on signs for bathrooms, for different rooms throughout the church. I think it's extremely important to see and hear an updated version of language and behaviors.
Connie, you want to go? Okay. So yes, short answer, yes. Like this is one of the biggest gripes I hear from my college students is that they don't see the church doing what they say that they're doing, which in part is also on them to be on the lookout. But show of hands, how many of your churches have an Instagram? How many of your churches have a Facebook page? Problem number one. Young adults are not on Facebook anymore. Not as much. That's just, this is like a microcosm of this conversation, but when we use GroupMe for communication actually, which is a college thing, but we get more traction from our Instagram than we do even from our GroupMe, because GroupMe is seen as by some of our college students is like, oh, well, there's a million different GroupMes, but it's so easy for me to find you on Instagram and see what you're doing. Pictures are crucial. The other part of this question that I think is interesting is, one of the things that drew me to the Presbyterian Church is our ability to have conversations. The idea that we, even here in this room, we all don't agree on what the best way forward socially, politically, theologically is. Maybe we are in, for the most part, agreement going in this direction. And maybe not even everybody here might be Presbyterian. And I get this from my context is ecumenical, because we at Jacob's Porch it's an ecumenical campus ministry. We have a Lutheran minister, a Methodist minister, and me, the Presbyterian minister, along with a Muslim resident and an Episcopalian resident who live in the building. And I think the idea that we can engage in conversation with those who we disagree with is crucial. Now, your churches might not as a whole agree that Black Lives Matter. Your churches as a whole might not believe in affirming gender equality and marriage equality. Maybe they do as a whole, as the denomination does as a whole, but we recognize that in our churches there are those who disagree with that. And there's going to be conflict that comes when we do participate in a Martin Luther King Day March, or we do participate in a vigil for those who have been harmed in the past by racism, sexism, and hate in all of its forms. And we have to be bold enough to have the conversation when the conflict comes up. I think that's part of it. I served in a purple church down in Burlington. Serving in the church, and even the Presbyterian church in the South, is a fascinating, stark difference from serving in the church up here. But that's not to say that we're devoid of the same conflicts that they've faced. What I will say is, one of the things that I think we did really well was we had conversations about these hot button issues, which are things that a lot of young people don't see the church responding well to. And that's not to put a fire under anybody. That's not to put anybody on blast for not doing this. I think a lot of us do this work already. But how many times I've had the conversation with Presbyterian students about what it means to be Presbyterian, in my perspective, and how that goes against the grain for some of them. Some of our Presbyterian students who I've encountered don't understand the church as an affirming, to be affirming. And we've had conversations about why I think it should be a place that is, and why they think it shouldn't be. This is kind of getting into the next topic, sorry. But the idea that we engage in a dialogue with those that we disagree with is important, as much as it is to stand up for what it is that we believe. Now, to those who disagree with those things, if you're sitting here in this room and you disagree with those things, if your church is a church that doesn't want to participate in public displays of, say, political action or civil service, that's fine. It's okay. That's not the only way to connect with young adults who care about these issues. But just know that it is going to be something that they ask about. And if the answer is no, that may be one of the reasons why they don't want to participate in the community to the extent that you expect them to participate.
Thank you, Taylor. I think the importance of being willing to have open conversation about this is an important part of the millennial conversation. Millennials want to, even if you completely disagree, want to sit down and have respectful conversation. They want to be treated as an adult. They don't want to be treated as the kid that doesn't know anything yet. They want to come to the table as equals and have everyone be willing to respectfully and calmly have these conversations to reach understanding of each other. And it could be that this isn't a good fit for this millennial because the values don't align, but having those conversations is an important aspect of learning whether this church is a good fit for you. And being able to really dig into these issues, the good, the bad, and the ugly of them, to make sure that millennials understand them, understand where your church is coming from, is so important for the millennial and for the church, so that there's not any misalignment in communication in the long run. Sorry, Connie, I took away from you.
No, you're good. You're good. Yeah, just to kind of piggyback off of everything, my students make fun of me for being on Facebook all the time. They think it's hilarious and they call me an old person because I'm on Facebook. So, I think what Taylor said is like key with that, get on Instagram. Snapchat is really big. I know Snapchat's weird, but get on Snapchat maybe. I don't know. Search for other opportunities for, young adults, millennials, Gen Z to get involved and see your church where they're at, not necessarily where you, the church, is at. And then just to kind of go off of that, I do think having those conversations, having them online, not having a conversation online, but having what your church values are, put it right there on your website is huge. A lot of people are finding churches now based on their websites, based on their Instagram pages, based on Facebook pages. It's not just simply, I'm going to go to church and see how it fits. I'm going to research first. I'm going to look online. I'm going to watch a service online. I'm going to look at the bulletin. I'm going to look at, a sermon. All of those things play into somebody coming to a church from that millennial aspect. And I think that keeping that in the forefront of your mind, what do you want to share? Do you want to share that you're doing Matthew 25, systemic poverty, systemic racism? Do you want to share that that's something that your church participates in? Do you want to share if you're doing a sermon series on loving your neighbor and what that may look like? How far do you want to go on your websites with that? And to piggyback off something Taylor said earlier, is having those pastor cards out for people who do come. You know, if they are a new member, if they are a young person, they want to have that conversation. Having that reach out card available, they don't have to approach you themselves. They can put it in the offering plate. They can make it not anonymous, but kind of like anonymous, so that they can have that one-on-one conversation with you to see if that is a place for them.
Yeah, thank you, for sure. I mean, it's like, why do you text somebody instead of when they pick up the phone? You're like, no, I just want to text you. So I just want to put that note in the plate right now. I don't want to have a conversation yet. So Taylor's going to tell us, share some experiences about college and some Gen Z folks, and then Connie has some resources from Peace USA. So.
All right, I'm going to get up on my soapbox for a little bit. So I work with students, faculty, and staff at OSU, particularly, but I've also been able to connect. It's been a joy to connect with various youth groups here in Scioto Valley, and get to know some of the students that are coming up into these really crucial, important years. And I think that that's my goal with this next 5 to 10 minutes, however much time I got, is to convince you to be more involved in the however many college years there are for your college age folks. We see about 25 to 30 students on average during the fall semester regularly. We have 75 to 80 that we are connected to in our GroupMe that we will see sporadically throughout the course of an academic year. And just to give some statistics about who is coming to our place of worship, 60% of those are atheist and agnostic students. The majority of them the majority of our students, not just those 60%, have some prior interaction with the church, and it is not all good. A lot of our students come to us having to deconstruct what their theology is. We currently only have 2 students from the Presbyterian church because we were in the process of getting the Presbyterian connection started. But we have a group of 11 or 12 different Presbyterian students that I know of that are at OSU. And almost all of them are involved in campus ministry in some way, shape, or form. So the question for us has become, why are they not involved in Presbyterian campus ministry? What is it that attracts students to groups like Young Life, to more non-denominational focused churches that have outreach programs through OSU student organizations? And it's the sense of community that they find. It's the sense of community that we are not only capable of creating. The idea that college is a time that we have the freedom to explore what it is that we believe, to divert maybe away from what our parents taught us or what we were raised to believe in the church. The challenges of having to think critically about our politics, about our theology, about how we build relationships is a crucial step. And what I'd love to see the church do more is to invest, not financially, but sweat equity into these 4 years, 4 or 5 years, 6 years, however many it is. For most of our students, as we've said previously, they see the church as a place that talks the talk but doesn't always walk the walk. And a lot of times they're fascinated when they come in through our doors and they see us engaged in social activism and political activism on campus mainly. They are fascinated by conversations about women in the Bible, about immigration theology. Those are just two of the examples we've had this semester alone of series that we've done. They are students who are hungry to know more. And they have a billion questions that you will never expect. Do aliens exist, and does Jesus love them? Was something that we tackled last year. What are the psychedelic effects of drugs and religious experience, and how do they correlate? What are the ways in which the church has screwed up in the past, and how have we gotten to be where we are? That is a question we get every single year. So these are just examples of the things that students are curious about. But a lot of times our biggest struggle is finding those students. A lot of what we do in terms of connecting and outreach on campus happens within the first few weeks of the semester. We are present at the organization fair, in which 100,000, sorry, that's not that many. About 10,000 students come through each fall and looking for ways to get involved in the things that they're passionate about. And you've got everything from all of these different religion clubs to sports clubs to pretty much any activity you can ever imagine. OSU is a big place, and you're going to find your niche. And yet, we had a study from the university last year said that 60% of the campus expressed feelings of loneliness. On a campus of 60,000, that's 36,000 students struggled to find real, meaningful connection on campus. And I'm not saying that this is something that this is not anything that we can do to fix, really. We can continue to show up, we can continue to extend an open hand, but until young people start to trust this entity that to them is even as progressive as the Presbyterian Church is, when they see the word church, they're associating it with what they see in the media. And the church is not the greatest place if you're looking at just what you see online. We've tried to tell them differently, and we've made a lot of progress in healing for those who have had trauma with the church before. But the thing that really pulls students in is the sense of fellowship and community. If I know that I'm not the only person going through these feelings and these thoughts and these emotions, and there's free food, great. That starts a whole lot earlier. It starts a whole lot earlier than when they get to college. We love to have young people in the church. I've heard that a million times. The first job I ever held was as a youth director at a small church that had 7 students in the church. And the first thing they said, we really want to grow the group. And I was like, first of all, I'm not even in seminary yet. I don't know how to do that. So what I do know how to do, though, is to build really deep, meaningful relationships with the students that you do have. And now those students then went off, and I've had the joy of watching them go off to college and now become young adults themselves and stay connected to the church, some of them. Others went off to college, and they didn't have that support continue from their congregation. I've had students that are very excited about spirituality, and I've had students that are so focused on their studies and getting into the right job, the right internship, the right sorority or fraternity. These are things that might seem silly to us, but they're things that these students really are passionate about. And the ways in which I think the church can be better about this period of ministry is by being proactive about getting their students involved in campus ministries at the schools that they're going to. Because what we've seen, the Presbyterian students that we do have at OSU, prior to a year and a half ago when I started there, none of them knew Jacob's Porch existed, because we weren't billing Jacob's Porch as a Presbyterian campus ministry. And so they found other places. If there wasn't a place that looked like my church growing up, I'm going to go find something that does look like that. To me, that's also a win in some way. It's great to see students that if it's not here, I'm going to go find it myself. But more often than not, what they're going to do is they're going to say, it's not here, okay, I'm just not going to go. I'm not going to continue to look for it if it doesn't exist. I'm not going to build something new. I want to latch on to something that's already created and established. It's hard as a first-year student coming into college, trying to build something new. You're going to have one of those students out of every 100,000. And usually those students are the ones who were encouraged in their time in youth group and time in children's ministry to be part of the church. Now, that's not to say that the folks that you're going to be engaging with, especially for the clergy that are here, or for the educators that are here working in a specific context, you're going to be interacting with very few college students for very limited amount of time, but they do exist in your congregations right now. And it's not too late to get them plugged in. Not maybe to your community, but to the community that might lead them back to you. And it's not just about getting numbers in through the doors. Our goal, one of the rules that we have at the Porch is that we don't have students sign any kind of covenant, that they don't have to agree to anything other than to embrace everyone who enters through the door no matter what. That you don't have to believe what I believe, but I will hold space for you to share your voice, and I will listen to you, is the only requirement that we have. I don't have the goal of our Presbyterian students staying Presbyterian. If they find a church home somewhere else, that's great. The job is to keep them engaged spiritually. If we start to treat it as a numbers game, we're going to drive them further away. And during those 4 years in college is a make or break time for young people to then become young adults to seek it out. Because I guarantee you, the young adults that you see in your churches right now are there because of proximity, primarily. You're going to have a big handful, though, still, who knew what it was like growing up in the PCUSA. And they're going to remember, hey, this is the church that I grew up in. I've done enough soul searching and time exploring what it is that I believe, and I think that this is the right fit. But more often than not, you're engaging people that are encountering the Presbyterian church for the first time. And sometimes you're going to be encountering people who have religious trauma with the church. And helping them unpack that is one of the most crucial things that we can do for especially young people that are coming right out of college. Because what they see primarily is people on the Oval with signs saying that you're going to hell for this, and that. Every single day on the quad at OSU, there are those people out there. You know who's not out there? People counter-protesting that stuff. That's hard work. That's a lot. We go out there from time to time, and we're not out there counter-protesting. We have a big orange couch that we wheel out on the Oval, and it has a sign that says, "Tell us your story." And that juxtaposed with the guy with the sign on the next Oval down, it never ceases to make me laugh. But students always see that. They don't always see the life-giving things that the church can do. So, I don't know if you want to, we have a lot of other things to do. I would love to answer any of your questions you have in regards to college after this. I know we have a portion of 10 after, but if you have questions about the college year specifically, I would love to talk to you. I'll talk to you. But we have other things.
Yes, thank you, Taylor. So Taylor will be happy to share more on college stuff. The one last thing that I did want to share that I learned when I did a Jacob's Porch thing is how many ministry, yes.
So on OSU's campus, there are about 50 to 60 different Christian campus ministries. We are one of 3 that are affirming. Three groups on campus that are open and affirming and put that proudly out there on our display tables and in our advertising material. Yeah. So that's not to say that we are the only 3 affirming groups on campus. There are many others. But one of the things that OSU is also currently dealing with is the loss of DEI. And a lot of students are starting to feel that they do not have a place to go to with the university. So they are seeking out these organizations because of the loss of the Center for Belonging and Social Change. Number one is the biggest thing. We're seeing that is coming to an end here at the end of this semester. This is a place for LGBTQ inclusion, for racial and gender identities and sexual identities to be expressed openly. They had advocates for that connected to the university, and there are still going to be some people from that center continuing to work. But the church is positioned, and these other organizations are positioned to either be a place of welcoming and hospitality for these folks who are soon to lose a sense of belonging on campus, or we can ignore them entirely and lose an entire generation. So that's not to be fear-mongering. I'm just putting it out there.
But I think to reiterate the importance that if your church does believe in DEI, to invite and announce and tell people this is what we're about. We want you to be part of this, to make sure that people who are losing a community through their university or through other groups they're in, that will be coming to an end. The church is an option for that. The church is a place where we do accept you and we want you to be here.
Just say one last thing. The metaphor that I've been using is a pipeline. We have a lot of time and effort and energy that's invested into children and youth ministry, and I love that. I think it's one of the most vital things that we do. But if we also then imagine our goal of the end of that pipeline being back into our churches, and we're missing that middle section, I don't know how we expect the students that come through this pipeline and then burst out in the middle to then suddenly be recollected in the other side of that pipeline. So if we aren't investing, and at this point I will say, on this topic, I'll say financially to an extent, but also spiritually and physically, if we're not investing into these 4 years, we have some structural problems that are not being addressed.
All right, so Connie, thank you guys for sharing so much. Connie is going to walk us through, I just handed out the handout to everybody, Connie, so if you'll help us with this resource and take us home.
Yeah. So I did just want to piggyback one more time off of what Taylor said with his pipeline analogy. I see that a lot in just the general church of us having these great, wonderful kids programs and then having older adult ministry programs, and there's nothing in the middle. So I just want to, take that from that college campus experience and place that into our own individual churches as well. Because that is something that I feel like a lot of our churches struggle with as well. So I just wanted to put that out there in everybody's mind. I'm going to share my screen again just so that I can see what I'm referencing and so you can also see where I'm at as well. Maybe. Okay, I think I got it. So I did some digging on the PCUSA website, and if you know what I mean by did some digging, it took me a little bit of time to get to this resource. But a lot of what this resource has to offer was very helpful for what I thought we were talking about today. And I'm actually going to scroll down and I'll tell you where to go to in your packets. But the first part is the yellow section, practicing hospitality with young adults. In that things to consider section, this is kind of where I talked about grace before. But young adults we are the hospitality people. So there's a big debate on when people say, like a young adult would do something and somebody would say thank you and we'll say no problem instead of saying you're welcome because it's not a burden to us. It's what we're expected to do. And so there's a little bit of a generational shift with that of, we're expected to be hospitality people to anybody and everybody. So generally that makes us more welcoming of individuals with different backgrounds, orientations, abilities, identities. That's the society that we grew up in. One thing interesting here is thinking about anti-bullying, acceptance and inclusion. Just that being actively taught about those things. I know I was taught about those things starting, third, fourth grade, whereas people who are in the older generation probably never had that teaching in school. And so just kind of keeping that in mind, like we are predisposed to being hospitality people. Um, and being part of a church, if they're not very hospitality wise in the church, that can be difficult. That can be some of that value system that's different. So just kind of keeping that in mind. Um, Especially with inclusion, and acceptance. Diversity of voice and leadership. So getting different people in different leadership roles throughout the church, not the same people year after year after year. Yeah, so after it tells you a little bit about each section, it gives you some suggestions on how to engage in those different topics. So for engaging in hospitality, it's some of the options would be have a discussion on concept of invitation. What does invitation mean? Does that mean a email blast to the whole church? Does that mean a one-on-one invitation? Does that mean a personalized phone call from somebody on the committee inviting you to a meeting? So what does that look like? Conversations of radical hospitality, hospitality beyond faith community walls. I think that's a huge one for our young adults. Young adults sometimes don't want to just sit in a pew in church. They want to do things. They want to be out in the community. They want to be doing things. So that's something that I definitely highly recommend looking at. And then just involving young adults in the works. We kind of already talked about this of deacons, care teams, those small commitments, those 30-minute, 1 hour commitments where they feel like they're making a difference and they're being included in the church work, but they might not necessarily be having a commitment every week for 3 hours on a Saturday when they're trying to do sports or kids or, life with their spouse or something like that. So the next section is practicing prayer with young adults. A big concept here is prayer is very different for our young adults than what it would be for our older generations. Prayer for young adults is anywhere, anytime, any place. Any number of people can be in the room and you can still pray. A lot of times for older generations, it's clasping hands together, bowing heads, doing it in the pew of the church, following along with somebody who's leading that prayer. Or it's at night before you go to bed, you say your nightly prayers, those kinds of things. Young adults really don't have that. They just don't have that concept. So just kind of exploring prayer with them, or with your church. What does prayer look like? What does prayer mean? And really going behind the kind of the curtain, would you say, on what the purpose of prayer is. Really diving into that theology of what is the purpose of prayer. And I think a lot of young adults really, really could use that non-traditional prayer and grace. Most of this packet is kind of the same thing. Things to consider about young adults in that prayer perspective, or a lot of things to consider with young adults. And then going into that explanation on how you can make that happen in your church, or in your community. So service, I thought this was a great as well. Different ways on how to do that mission work. I know that was a question we got. How can you include young adults in that mission work versus, church work, school work, scout troops, sport events, other activities? How can we get that mission church of the church? And then this resource is for you to have. It's on PCA USA website. There's a lot of things in here. I found it very helpful when I was going through and just researching some things for our young adult panel today. And as Taylor said, I am also available for any questions or anything like that. I am on council at the Presbyterian level, so my email should be somewhere on the Presbyterian of Scioto Valley website. And if you don't have it, I'm sure somebody there can give it to you. But I'm always available for questions as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And we had such great discussion. We ran over a little bit, but I thank Connie and Claudia and Taylor for joining us today, and all of you and sharing your questions that you had and your experiences. And we're going to move into worship. Thank you.
Hi, thank you.